Hi there, I'm Trish Lynch from IOHR TV. Today I'm joined by Fernand de Varennes, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues. According to the Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion, today more than 15 million people face a life without a nationality, and every 10 minutes another child is born stateless. Fernand, good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You assumed your role in 2017. Now we know that 3/4 of the world's stateless population are minorities. So the issue of statelessness definitely is a minority issue. Tell me why minorities in particular are affected by statelessness.
A number of factors, obviously. There's not one cause of statelessness. There's different contexts which can lead to statelessness, particularly for minorities. One of them is when you have a minority or an indigenous people which is nomadic. That raises certain difficulties in terms of identification, perhaps, which may mean that the end result is, in a sense, statelessness of these communities or many members of these communities. Living close to borders between states also. If you have a pastoralist community, which often would be a minority one, you may have the challenges in terms of knowing precisely where individuals were born, whether they were born in one side of the border or another. However, having said that, let's be quite frank and quite clear. Most of the world's minorities or stateless minorities belong to a few minority communities, such as the Rohingya. And in relation to the Rohingya in Myanmar, you have a situation where up to 1 million people are individuals who were born in Myanmar, who have family backgrounds there for generations. And it is the legislation in Myanmar which has evolved in a way which in a sense has denied or removed their citizenship which they previously had. So the end result is that many, if not most of those 75% stateless minorities are the, let's say, victims of legislation, policies or practices that target or tend to impact on them more precisely.
In 2017, UNHCR officially recognised statelessness as a minority issue. What difference does this make, and what's the benefit of this recognition?
There is a benefit, but more needs to be done. There is a benefit in recognizing the nature of the issue, the extent of the problem, and in fact that certain measures have to address these challenges. I don't think enough has been done, because even within the UNHCR's plans of action, 10 action plans, if you will, 10 action directions, none of them refer directly to minority, although they do mention, for example, elimination of discriminatory practices, which is one of the main causes of statelessness for minorities. But I think there should have been perhaps more direct measures initiative, given the scale of, or the proportion of the status who are minorities. So I think there has to be a greater highlighting of the nature of the problem and addressing it more specifically and directly.
As UN Special Rapporteur, you submit annual reports, take country visits and you make recommendations. Tell me, what's the most urgent priority in your agenda at the moment?
Right now there is a situation developing in Assam, India, which I think has to be looked at with a certain urgency. And I'm referring to a procedure which is in place currently right now. Most of them belong to one minority group, the Bengali. And this procedure of declaring these individuals foreigners essentially means that they are not recognized as citizens of India. Some of them may or may not have citizenship in Bangladesh, so it would be extremely difficult to demonstrate. There is an additional procedure where some individuals may be able to demonstrate that they are in fact citizens of India. But the situation, in essence, means right now that we are facing the threat of up to 4 million people, new people, being effectively stateless. And if you think the situation of 1 million Rohingya in Myanmar develop into a huge humanitarian crisis and a human disaster, the situation in Assam, India could be twice, 3 times, maybe 4 times worse in terms of scale, but also the human consequences. And we have situations right now where individuals are committing suicide because they're desperate.
The initial aim of UNHCR Belong campaign was to end statelessness by 2024. Given the figures that we've seen at this year's conference, we believe there are around 15 million people who are currently stateless. Every 10 minutes, a child is born without a nationality. Are you on track? Is it still a realistic goal?
I think the UNHCR has accomplished a number of successes. For example, gender discrimination laws in a number of countries, which prevented women from transmitting their citizenship to their children, have been changed. It's been modified. Gender discrimination has been eliminated. There are a number of other initiatives in a few countries which actually have succeeded in granting citizenship to thousands of individuals. So I think there has been a great deal of success. I do think perhaps now is the time to reflect on the challenges, and particularly the situations such as in Assam, India, which I mentioned, which run the risk of actually threatening the I Belong campaign, actually. So I think there is something else that needs to be done at this stage. There has been a great deal of success in a number of areas, but there are, specifically in relation to minorities, much more that should be targeted and initiative along those lines accomplished, specifically on the greatest challenges, and that's the issue of minorities that are being targeted, as in the case in Assam.
The deprivation of citizenship, often used as a tool for exclusion of national, ethnic, religious and linguistic minorities. And according to UNHCR, at least 20 countries maintain these discriminatory nationality laws. Tell me, what's the best way? What's the best pathway to change this?
The best pathway is to actually focus and clarify what it means to have laws and policies and practices that are discriminatory in relation to minorities. That has not been done yet. That's actually one of the initiatives that under my mandate we've embarked on. We've brought together a number of experts to try to elaborate a report, but also practical guidelines on how to avoid discriminatory legislation, policies and practices that target or impact specifically minorities, because that's where the main difficulty lies. And hopefully, in collaboration with the UNHCR, we might be able to do a bit more in that direction, because it hasn't been done yet.
In March, you informed the Human Rights Council of new initiatives, including the drafting of practical guidelines that recognise and address the root causes of statelessness and ways to tackle the human rights issue that are at its very core. Tell me more about that, if you would.
This has never been done before, but it is in a way identifying the fundamental problems of where the main challenges exist, such as legislation in Myanmar, and it seems measures, procedures in Assam, India, that can lead to statelessness of minorities, but identify why they're discriminatory, how they're discriminatory, how they should be avoided and why, and then providing, writing perhaps in a clear, practical way, some of the measures that states have to take in order to avoid adoption of these laws. In some cases, discriminatory laws are adopted not because of any bad faith or mala fides, as we say in law, but because there are historical contexts that leads governments to conclude that certain individuals ought to be treated differently. And by the way, differences of treatment is not automatically discriminatory. You have to look at why it's done, what are the impact, if this is going to create disadvantages or exclusion and whatnot. So I think there needs to be, and what these practical guidelines are seeking to identify are good practices, which do exist in a number of countries in relation to clearly to trying to make sure not to adopt discriminatory legislation, and then identifying the risk, the danger signals of what may constitute discriminatory practices, and thirdly, provide perhaps some indications of what would be a better approach and how this could be legislated and practiced.
Roma form one of the largest groups among the ethnic minorities that are either stateless or at risk of becoming stateless. What needs to be done to help these people, and above all, which government needs to intervene in their particular case?
I think all governments do. I mean, we are talking here about situations where you have a vulnerable population, vulnerable minorities, sometimes subjected to intolerance that may have been widespread in society. So this is a responsibility of all governments where Roma, for example, may be present. Obviously, there's no easy solution. Part of the difficulty is, of course, requiring certain documents to establish residence or to establish identity. In some countries, some of these documentary evidence requirements are actually burdensome. We know that. So there's the necessity to have as non-burdensome, non-difficult documentary requirements as possible. Mm-hmm. There are situations where, given the nature of these communities of the Roma minority, that state officials have to be sensitive and aware of the particular situation of Roma who may in fact have during their life have lived in many different areas. Mm-hmm. And so therefore you need to have in place procedures, if you will, steps that acknowledge the challenges, the difficulties for certain types of documents, and therefore provide for different ways of identifying individuals so that they can actually demonstrate that they are citizens much more easily. There's a number of organizations and governments that have actually taken steps in this direction, and in some countries in Europe this is working pretty well, but obviously a lot more has to be done in others. And unfortunately I can't name them right now to you, but this is in fact, there are also with the European Union initiatives that have been done along those lines, but obviously once again more has to be done.
Iraq to have one of the largest reductions of statelessness globally due to reforms in nationality laws and the introduction of policy. Are there any other shining lights out there, any other countries that are moving in the right direction to decrease statelessness?
Yes, there are. I think you have situations even in Canada. We've adopted a few things. We do have Roma in Canada, by the way, one of the former Yugoslav republics, mm-hmm. where they actually have taken steps to create, to require very few documents. In other words, that Roma may actually demonstrate that they are citizens with a number of relatively light requirements along those lines.
Dr. de Varennes, we thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of IOHR TV. IOHR are the official NGO media sponsor of the World Conference on Statelessness here in The Hague. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. From myself, Trish Lynch. Goodbye.